If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
Merry Christmas to everyone but Bob Nutting is something that I saw on the Twitter sphere, Facebook, and everywhere you find, your Pirates news. And it just doesn't have the same feeling that it used to do the first time that I read it. The first time I saw that, probably 10, 15 years ago, I chuckled pretty good. Yesterday when I read those, I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and thought, man, can't come up with anything new. And kind of in the same way, but not with as much angst, the Pirates re-sign, bring back Andrew McCutchen, the feeling that we all felt a couple of years ago, the home opener with Cutch out there taking, the nod, his mom singing the national anthem, him coming back, not that he's not a serviceable ball player, just does not have the same feeling. Scott, how you doing today, brother?
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Now that the holidays are past, I feel like some more mental real estate has opened up so that I can focus on the Pirates a little bit more. And we are getting closer and closer to spring training, pitchers and catchers reporting. We are, a month and a half away from that. But yeah, Andrew McCutchen, I feel good. He always has a place on the team for me. It's just a soft spot in my heart. But if we could just make the playoffs, make a run, let him ride off into the sunset this year, because he's not getting any younger. He's still productive. He brings leadership to the team. He puts butts in seats at PNC Park. And we can't discount how important that is. But man, we want to see him make an impactful run into October. But then, the best thing that can happen for this team is for someone to step up and phase Cutch out.
That would be kind of nice. I mean, I do know that there will be players that will get their rest days and fill in the DH spot, which, I mean, kind of happened a decent amount last year. Cutch was dealing with some minor injuries, not as, severe as he had during the previous season. But, I mean, the big thing I hear people saying out there is that, Cutch, of course, bring him back. He was, all intents and purposes, our third best hitter among qualified hitters. If you throw in Joey Bart, who had less than 300 plate appearances, which is normally the cutoff, you have to go the whole way back to 282 plate appearances for him to be, the fourth best hitter. But in essence, I mean, if your fourth best hitter is a guy with a 739 OPS, which everyone knows that if I think if a player has an OPS over 700, especially if they fill some sort of other void within your lineup, especially if it's a good defensive player, if they're doing other types of stuff, you get a guy that's over 700, they are a starter. But when you don't have a single player with an OPS over 800, I mean, that is kind of more of the issue. But we also did see Cutch take some steps back last year. He had an all-time high in K rate, went up over 25% last year. I mean, me and you have talked about the bad luck kind of that he had with that, because he does have such a good eye that he was getting more strikes, more strikeouts for pitches that were outside of the zone. You see the cut shrug when he gets frustrated with that type of stuff. I don't have a problem with bringing him back, but like we said, it doesn't have the same feeling. And then also, like, the team didn't get any better. I mean, when we see, like, players get out and get acquired, that you hope that you look at the team the next day and say, okay, with the addition of this player, the team got better. And with the two moves the Pirates have made, or I should say major moves they've made so far this offseason, you lose Luis Ortiz, who was, one of the top pitchers on your staff, and you bring in an unknown in Horwitz. Does that make the team better? Well, it fills the first base hole, but it also takes away some wins that, Luis provided to you. And McCutcheon's been on the team for the past 2 years, two 76 win teams in a row. So it doesn't really make the team better. So that's kind of where my frustration is lying at this point in time. I mean, getting ready to, flip the calendar to 2025. And not that I hadn't been in baseball mode, but this is really when my mind starts to go into that. And I do think we will see some additions made here. I just want one to be just a little bit of a needle mover.
Yeah, I want to see a bit of a splash. And to the Cutch point, I think that yes, he's a professional hitter. He brings some great at bats to your team. I just don't want, and I'm happy to have him, and I love having him. I just don't want the team to lean on him as much as they did last year. When he went through his slumps, it seemed like the offense was slumping right along with him. If he doesn't have that presence to lead the team by example, it's just a different team. And so, yeah, if we can have someone who steps up and takes, for lack of a better phrase, I guess, take at bats away from Cutch, that just means that they're in a better position going forward. But I think, yeah, you are going to see some more moves. There's holes to fill. You're going to see moves get made. Hopefully, better than the Michael A. Taylor move last year. Hopefully, we don't wait as long, and hopefully, it's more productive. But guys are dropping off the board left and right. Jock Peterson signed what I think is a big contract for what he provides with the Texas Rangers. It's a platoon guy. This is, what is it, 2 years, 34 million, with an opt out after the first year. You know, I can understand, and I don't want to be a Bob Nutting defender. That's the last thing I want to be. But when you're seeing these numbers of what guys are signing for, I understand why moves haven't been made. We don't want to be that team that signs a guy just for the purposes of signing a bigger name and have it blow up in our face and set things back, 2, 3, 4 years. Because if you get this guy that has the Cody Bellinger contract where they have an opt out after every year, you really have the opportunity to shoot yourself in the foot year after year after year and take resources away from places that it can go otherwise.
And we talked about that. I mean, one of my biggest things this past offseason is everybody was wanting Reese Hoskins. And we've talked about Hoskins before. He had a serviceable year, but as far as what you were paying him and what you were expecting from him, it was a little bit of a dud of a contract year for him. And so he obviously, opts into that because I don't know if there would be a place for him on the open market. But I mean, who knows? Maybe at this point in time, he's
Yeah.
maybe kicking himself in the foot a little bit when he's seeing some of these big contracts being laid out to players that really are kind of just platoon players. So that's like those things are very weird to see. And like you said, not wanting to be a Bob Nutting defender, people would say that's just the price of doing business. But I mean, when there are teams that can just pretty much outbid you left and right, then there's really not a lot of wiggle room for the Pirates. We don't know what, the payroll is going to end up being. The only number I've seen mentioned is 100 million, and that's not even 100 million to start the year. I think there's been some clarification that it could be, 100 million at the end of the year, because usually, with injuries and players getting picked up and different things like that, most of the time the payrolls will go up unless you're trading away and cutting expenses towards the end of the season. Then it may go down. But I mean, with signing Cutch, we're looking at them being right around like 78, $79 million at this point in time. You send 17 million to a platoon DH player. I mean, you've pretty much, I'm looking at it as, maxing out whatever Bob Nutting's budget that he gave to Ben Cherington is. And then you still have, other holes that would be out there. I mean, obviously an outfielder, uh, bullpen help. So, I mean, it's just very, very frustrating as a Pirates fan to not see them, go out there and make that move. But as we've talked about before, even if they do make that move, we don't know if it will be that move until the season progresses. Like a Russell Martin having a couple bounce back years, AJ Burnett having a renaissance. Don't know what Spencer Horwitz is, but even with those things kind of in the back of my mind, yeah, there is some line for improvement for the Pirates to be able to be a competitor in what we always say is a weak division. It's obviously not as strong as like an NL West or an AL East, but there are, always one or two teams that kind of shine above maybe even what people are projecting them to be at the beginning of the season when they end up, in the playoffs or in the playoffs hunt at the end of the season.
Yeah, that's the thing about being in the Central, and we see it in both leagues. You don't have the same kind of huge markets that you have on the coasts. Chicago is, of course, a good sized market, but you're not competing with your New Yorks, your Bostons, your Toronto, which really they keep coming up in second place on a lot of these free agent deals and offers. They have the resources of an entire country. One of the largest companies in an entire country owns this team with what seems like unlimited resources. It's like if ESPN or Disney owned a baseball team. The kind of resources that they would have there. And so you're not competing with those kind of teams. That's what's so amazing about the Rays is that they're in the American League East with all these heavyweights, and they can still, be successful. They haven't won it all, but they hang in there year after year. And then on the West Coast, of course, all your LA teams and all of that, and you have teams that push themselves just to hang in with the LA teams. So by being in the middle of the country, we are facing some like-sized teams and markets. Um, but yeah, with teams like the Brewers trading away players or not re-signing Adamas, and the Cardinals, they were in second place in the division last year, but they were 10 games back. But they're doing what they can to move Nolan Arenado. Paul Goldschmidt moved on. They're taking a retooling. I think that they're not going to do the 5-year rebuild like you see the Pirates talk about and other teams. I think that they have the resources, because I don't know why everybody talks about them being a smaller market team where they're mid to large market. They have most of that. The Midwest of the country is their territory, so they have plenty of geographic locations. So I think they have the resources that they can warp speed their retooling for about a 3-year window. So the now that's where you balance with the Pirates, where Charrington wants to do, like we've talked about, the Rays style of constantly being in it. But at the same time, you weigh that versus if you really go in right now with a win now mentality and you go and you spend money, the division is up for grabs. But how does that jive with what he's trying to do to set things up for maybe the next 10 years. It's a winnable division with teams seemingly taking steps backwards, except for the Cubs, who seem to be going for it. You know, what do you do if you're in charge of a team like the Pirates? Do you sacrifice your long term vision to try to have some success and you shorten your window? It doesn't seem like Charrington is that kind of guy. We haven't seen him be swayed by performance, by hot streaks. At the same time, he doesn't get swayed by cold streaks either. So he seems like a stick to the plan kind of guy, and I don't see them going all in.
Yeah, trust the process. And for the weird thing about the Cubs, and we were talking about it before the show, is that I mean they, said they needed to cut costs, bring other players in. So the Wrigley fortune. Do you know what I mean? They shouldn't be a team that should be worried about getting rid of a Cody Bellinger who didn't have his MVP type seasons, but obviously was a contributing player to then go out and get Kyle Tucker. I mean, obviously the team, if you look at it as a whole, is I mean, I would probably, if I was sitting here right now, no other moves are made. I would project them to possibly move up and win the division this year, with like a Dansby Swanson. I mean, they went out and got Shoto Imanaga. They got Justin Steele. I mean, there's a lot of good players. Trading for Michael Bush, I mean, that's like one of those like sneaky good moves that you wish, the Pirates would kind of jump on to get a guy that is hasn't been able to crack in on a good lineup, but throw some prospects their way, and then you get an answer at a position for hopefully like 4 or 5 years. And then the Cardinals. Yeah, the Cardinals, I mean, if you ever go out to St. Louis, they have like Ballpark Village. So they have all of this income that's, coming into their team, and they will spend it. I mean, eventually, getting out from underneath some of these contracts, and then, you know, hopefully drafting and developing, which is something that they've always been good at as well. I mean, what's the number of times that we've seen like a no-name player come up through their system and contribute to their team for 4, 5, 6 years?
Mm.
Another thing that you kind of would want the Pirates to do, but it's definitely a weird looking division at this time. You mentioned the Brewers. I mean, making a trade before last season. I mean, they did get Joey Ortiz out of the deal. I mean, but not having Corbin Burns. Brandon Woodruff is coming back from an injury. Trading Devin Williams, who I know was injured for parts of last season. But I mean, that's obviously we're talking about when I say, does this make your team better or does this make your team worse? Well, pretty much everything that has happened with the Brewers, so far this offseason, I haven't seen anything that has immediately made their team better. I mean, they do have Cortez in there starting now, but I mean, is that enough of a needle mover? A smart team that usually seems to be able to figure these types of things out. And then there's us, and then there are the Reds. The Reds are willing to spend money at times, but I mean, like you had talked about before, to me, is that the Reds kind of did go for it a couple years ago. It got them a piece of the pie. It got them into the playoffs in a shortened season in 2020, but then in the end, was that worth it?
Yeah, yeah. Do you really mortgage the future to seize an opportunity, not just in monetary resources but prospect capital? You can't build it all through free agency, so you send prospects out. And yeah, most of those guys aren't going to hit, but you may lose out on a few. And something that I don't see with the Pirates is at least the Reds had, Castillo to to replenish everything in the trade to Seattle. Um, and so, but we don't really see that in Pittsburgh. But that's a benefit of us being on the cusp too. We're not going to move a superstar player. We're not going to trade a Paul Skeens yet, uh, even though we would get a king's ransom for him. because we have intentions to win. So yeah, there's that trade off. What exactly do you do? Do you shorten your window? Do you try to keep the window open as long as possible? What are you willing to give up? What's the trade off? Um, but yeah, it is amazing that the Cubs really don't seize the division by, like you said, keeping Bellinger and getting Tucker, because really they can afford to make moves that other teams in the division cannot make. But when I was looking into this a little bit, I was looking at MLB trade rumors, and maybe there's still an opportunity for the Reds to screw everything up because they were attached to Garrett Crochet. There's rumors that they're interested in Luis Robert, which would be awesome if you just give up a bunch of prospects for Luis Robert and have him show up and give up on the team, not try his best. That completely when the Pirates played in Chicago last year, and we got to see him play. And I know you watch more White Sox than I do, but actually getting him to see him and see how he played completely turned me off, and I wanted nothing to do with him at all. Yeah, his stat line looks fine, but we talk about the eye test, and I just don't see him. So if Cincinnati wants to take him and do the thing that we keep talking about the Pirates not doing, is mortgaging the future for to take a chance on something and have it blow up in their face, I'm perfectly fine with that if Cincinnati wants to do it.
We'll let them kind of make our mistakes for us, and that's where, like, with the Pirates this season, like when I'm looking at kind of this roster and bringing Cutch back and bringing in Horwitz, who is kind of like a bat to ball type of guy, may not have the power. Cutch with his great eye. You bring in IKF, who did not perform well with the Pirates towards the end of the season, but is kind of a professional hitter, and building out this lineup with, I guess it would be players that may not help you as much as you want them to, but not having a bunch of players in the lineup that will hurt you. And I know it's not the sexiest way to look at things. A lot of people would see it as playing, a decent amount of small ball. But when you have the pitching that the Pirates have, if you have a bunch of guys who aren't going to go into these huge slumps, that are, going to give you a professional at bat, that aren't going to, strike out a ton. I mean, I know they will have some of those guys in the lineup, but you're hoping that, like with a no Cruz, that the power will, outplay that strikeout rate that he will have. So you're kind of looking for him to take those steps forward. But I mean, he wasn't a guy that really, other than, a few weeks during the season, actually completely hurt your lineup. I know it's not like I said, the sexiest way to build a team, but it kind of seems like if you're trying to avoid certain types of risks with players. Yes, you're still looking for players to outperform, either their potential or outperform their contract with, like, getting a Horowitz who has, 6 years of control, but, has performed throughout his professional career and, should be a solid hitter, maybe not that thumper, that impact bat that you're looking for, but would be a guy that wouldn't hurt you. Brian Reynolds, he starts off slow normally, but once he gets going, he's going to be a guy that doesn't hurt you. You're looking at, Jared Triolo hopefully performing like he did at the end of last season. I mean, obviously you would want him to perform like he did at the end of 2023, but we saw that he was kind of, performing possibly above his skis at that point in time. But if you have him perform like a slightly above league average hitter for more of a period of time, you're building a lineup of guys that, like I said, that won't hurt you. Obviously, still want to add another professional at bat in there. I know that a lot of people will probably say that I'm setting myself up to not be disappointed when they bring in certain players, But then also, I'm the type of person who wants to try to figure out. I mean, instead of just going out there and saying, you know, Ben Cherington's not a very good GM. Well, he might not be, but I also just kind of want to figure out, how he is trying to build this team this year, because this is a team that we're going to watch for 162 games. I mean, obviously, we're Pirates fans, myself and you, who are, you know, getting a little bit older here. We've watched the team for years and years and years. We're not going to stop. So, and we know that there's other people out there listening, watching, whatever it may be, that are doing the same. So for me, it's just like almost trying to figure out, like, is that the type of, team that he is trying to build? It's a, kind of like, can we get a bunch of guys that are, league average hitters with a couple guys that may be slightly above that, but we don't have any of those, major holes in the lineup, the guys with the, 600 OPSs or the 60 WRC pluses, and just have, a league average offense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Call me old fashioned, but I sure would love to see a lineup constructed of guys who get on base and guys who can situationally hit to knock them in. Nick Gonzalez seems to have that gene. Somebody comes up, he comes up with runners in scoring position. He's moving runners. He's driving guys in. And you're right, with the pitching that the Pirates project to have, you don't need to score a ton of runs if the pitching performs the way that you hope that they do. So playing small ball, getting guys on, stealing bases, we saw them come out a couple of years ago starting really hot with stealing bases, stealing third more than any other team up to a certain point, putting guys in position to score, and then they got skittish and they backed off of that. But if you can't, you're not going to have the Bronx Bombers, and you're not going to have a lineup where you have multiple guys hitting 40 plus home runs. You have to generate runs. You have to play closer to the Moneyball philosophy of scoring runs to win games. And how can you put a roster together and, for Shelton, put a lineup together that is going to get guys on base, move runners over, play small ball, score runs, score more runs than the other team. And the bullpen is going to be a big part of that. And I think that that's maybe a mistake that Milwaukee is making, because they trade Williams and, yeah, they get Nestor Cortez. But as we saw with the Pirates last year, your season can be make or break if you don't have a guy or a group of guys that consistently can close games out.
Yeah, and with the Pirates, I mean, obviously you mentioned the bullpen. I mean, that is someplace that they definitely are going to add. It's will add at some point in time. We know that it's probably not going to be, at least like last year with like an Aroldis Chapman type move. I wouldn't see that happening. And like I said, I don't think that when we do fill that corner outfield spot, whether it be a left fielder, right fielder, or a guy that can play both, it's not going to have that same type of impact that we want it to have. It's not going to be the automatic 30 home run guy. Like I said, I just want it to be somebody in the lineup that it's just not out there for defense. I know Michael A. Taylor, even when he was signed, like I basically said, this makes our defense in the outfield better. In the end, it kind of really didn't, because, Reynolds taking a step back in his fielding at least, and then, the other players that we put in right field, it didn't work out the way they wanted it to happen. Like I said, I just want, more offense this year, and guys that don't hurt the lineup. And I think that's something that can be accomplished, kind of fairly cheaply, because I mean, a lot of times the guys that are getting those big contracts that you're talking about with like a Jock Peterson or quote unquote big contracts, I mean, it's a power guy. So you got to pay up for power. I mean, there's times where you're bringing in or you're signing guys to extensions that are, very defensive minded. I mean, we just saw the Guardians trade a guy to Toronto to get Spencer Horwitz, who is, what would be seen as a fairly expensive, defensive first guy. I just want a bunch of, I mean, it's going to sound simple, but just a bunch of ball players, guys that, that when they're stepping into the box, and obviously you want to have a player that pitchers are going to fear, but I also know that, kind of the way the Pirates lineup looks right now, it's not guys that you fear, but guys that the pitchers just can't get out.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and we saw the Pirates try to put together a team in a certain way last year, based on prior performance. When you looked at things going into spring training, seeing Michael A. Taylor, Edward Olivares, and looking at the production that they'd had in previous years, you're thinking, oh, wow, we're really going to take a step forward in the power department. And it just didn't play out that way. And so, yeah, by getting professional at bats, guys that can um, can look for walks at the right time, but still protect. Not the Cutch thing where and Sawinski does that too, right? It seems to know the zone so well that if you have an umpire that isn't calling it exactly as he sees it, stays with his approach, doesn't doesn't vary from his approach, which, hey, kudos for the consistency. But we were all taught from T-ball, protect, protect, protect. If it's close with two strikes, you know, try to make contact, at least foul it off. And so you get some of these guys that early in the counts, and I think that was part of the problem, with the prior administration of hitting coach Andy Haynes, that watching too many good pitches go by, waiting for the right pitch, getting yourself behind in the count, to the point where you have two strikes on you and you're taking too many strikeouts. That's counter to what you're talking about. You need guys that are going to get up there, be more aggressive, that are not going to strike out. At least put the ball in play. Whether or not they fall in for you. Like Triolo had happened for him a couple of years ago with BABIP that was just off the charts. At least put the ball in play, and that's going to be good. Things are going to happen when you do that, and that ties in with what I was saying with the small ball anyway. Guys that can put the bat on the ball and can move runners over, can do sacrifice. How many times do we have a runner on third with one out, or a runner a leadoff double, and just could not score the guy? Just fundamental baseball is going to create more runs. And I guess I sound way older than a lot of these people that you hear on social media or on podcasts where it's all about analytics. But I'm still a believer in get them on, get them over, get them in.
Yeah, and the way that I'm thinking right now is I could see people saying next year, Merry Christmas to everyone except for those bootlickers, Craig Toth and Scott Jackson.